Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeff Malinoff, and with me is the Nick Chubb. To my Sony Michelle, I give you Mark Souza.
How's it going?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Had a pretty decent week in fantasy. If I can get 8 points from Matt Breida tonight, I'll go 3-1 in my season long. So anytime I can go 3-1 or better in my 4 leagues, that's what I shoot for every week.
Yeah, and I just got word that Stan Lee, the Marvel comic legend, has passed away, and we say we miss him, and it's very tragic, and thoughts and prayers to his family and friends. Just want to point that out there. He's seemed like a great guy to get talk to, and I mean, no guy has influenced comic book nerds more than he has. So,
yeah,
absolutely. Rest in peace, Stan Lee. But continuing on to the fantasy football world, instead of the fantasy comic world, we have a lot to talk about.
Some big performances yesterday by some likely heroes and some unlikely heroes.
Yes. Do you want to start with the quarterbacks?
Sure, I can do that.
All right, I'll go first. I think this is an obvious one. Mitchell Trubinsky.
Yeah, another big game for him.
Yes. He had 355 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Shows that maybe they traded up one extra pick to get that number 2 pick really paid off.
Absolutely. He's been impressing this year. He's gone through his struggles, and I think he's really turned the corner. We'll see if he can keep it going.
Yes, absolutely. Who do you got?
All right, so opposite end of the spectrum, a guy who's done this many times, Drew Brees. Another huge
Shocking
game.
No one.
That's 2 games in a row, over 34 fantasy points. He had a rushing touchdown. He had 3 passing touchdowns.
Unusual.
He had 4 total touchdowns, 1 rushing from Drew Brees. That's incredible. The Saints offense is humming, and he is playing at his absolute best. As he has a case for MVP this year in the NFL, so that has to be good for your fantasy team.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He has definitely played extremely well. Let me ask you an important question, though. Would you call Ryan Fitzpatrick with 400 yards passing but 2 picks and no touchdowns a stud or a dud?
I mean, it's a dud. His numbers he didn't score that very many fantasy points.
Yeah, but do you think 400 yards should be more points than what they give out? Yeah, that was the question.
No, I think they have it right.
Okay. My other stud for quarterbacks is Russell Wilson. 3 touchdowns, speaks for itself. 92 yards rushing, 176 passing yards. The yards weren't spectacular, but 3 touchdowns itself really shows improvement.
Absolutely. Russell Wilson, you know what I liked yesterday with his game is that he's running the ball now. That had been missing for a lot of his fantasy season. I mean, he only had 1 game over 40 yards rushing, and that was 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, he almost has 100 yards on the ground. So in his last 2 games, he has 130 yards from scrimmage on the ground. And we know in fantasy football, rushing yards for a quarterback are huge. I mean, 9 points from running the ball without scoring a touchdown, that's a touchdown and a half in fantasy football scoring. So he might be getting back to that fantasy stud that people remember him by just a couple years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been playing extremely well, and that proved that he's still got some in the tank.
Yeah, he's getting better running the ball, so maybe he's just getting healthier. Maybe he wasn't using his legs a lot early on in the season. Everybody's wondering, like, why aren't they getting him out in space more? Is he hurt? Is the offense just different now? Well, they do run the ball a lot, but still, he is still showing the ability that he can make plays with his feet.
Do you have another stud for quarterbacks?
Yes, I do. How about we talk about Baker Mayfield? He had 28.6 fantasy points, 216 yards, but 3 touchdowns. He also had another 20 on the ground. So that's a really good game for Baker Mayfield. And get this, Jeff. He now has 3 of his last 4 games. He's had at least 21 fantasy points. The other one, he had 18. So he's showing to be a consistent starter. Maybe somebody you should consider starting from week to week on your team. We'll talk about him more later on.
Very possibly.
Mm-hmm. Any other quarterbacks you'd like to talk about?
Let's move to running back, shall we?
Oh, yeah. Let's do it.
First and foremost, I think Nick Chubb is an obvious stud. That 92-yard run itself for a touchdown really speaks for itself. Over 170 yards rushing total, and 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 passing, 1 receiving.
It's always nice when you can get 15 fantasy points off of one play, and that's exactly what Nick Chubb did for his owners yesterday.
Got to be the most in one play this season, right?
Yeah, well, it's the longest touchdown in the NFL this year. So, I mean, if you do half PPR or PPR scoring, maybe there was one that was 85 yards and a catch, but still, 15 fantasy points off of one play. That's awesome. Nothing's better than having that guy on your roster and then looking up and being like, oh, man, my score jumped.
Can you imagine if he was benched on your team, how mad you would be?
If he was benched on your team, then I hope you have 2 top 10 stud running backs because there's no excuse for that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that some people probably did.
Yep. Unfortunately.
Any other studs?
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about running backs. How about a guy, it's funny. It's just like with quarterbacks. We're talking about somebody new to the scene. How about somebody who's been there for a while? Ezekiel Elliott, 35.7 fantasy points and half PPR scoring. His last 2 games, Jeff, he had 5 points and then 13 points. That's not what you drafted him for. You drafted him for nights like last night. 19 carries, 151 yards, a touchdown. He also had a receiving touchdown, and he was so close from having that 3rd touchdown. I know we talked about it in the football podcast earlier. The one where he jumps over the defender. He can't maintain his balance, unfortunately, but heck of a performance. 35.7 fantasy points for the guy from Ohio State, Ezekiel Elliott. So I think that was a great bounce back game for him. What do you think?
Absolutely. Talk about just bouncing back from a rough game before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you bounce back. You just play your best. You play even better than you did before.
It's always nice when teams find different ways to get their best players the ball in the space and utilize their talent. So it was nice to see the Cowboys do that. So if you own Ezekiel Elliott, that should kind of quell your concerns about him moving forward. So what about any other running backs you'd like to discuss?
Running backs wise, Melvin Gordon.
Okay, another good game, yeah.
He didn't have 100 yards on either receiving or rushing, but he did combine for over 100 yards. Mm-hmm. So he had an impressive game, and he's just been on a tear, in my opinion. He's been a very excellent and conservative guy. 1 touchdown, sure, but bottom line is this guy can get you points when you need it.
Yeah, big time. Do you know that we saw 12 running backs get over 20 fantasy points yesterday in half PPR scoring? That's really, really high. 12.
That's pretty good.
5 over 30. So,
congratulations to those men.
I want to talk about one guy that had over 30 points. Again, talking about somebody who has a revival. Somebody who now has 2 decent games back-to-back at the running back position. David Johnson. 33.8 fantasy points. He had 98 rushing, a touchdown, 7 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. Again, the Cardinals, just like the Cowboys, they needed to find ways to get their best player, their star running back, the ball in different scenarios where he can make plays, score touchdowns, move the ball down the field. And although the Cardinals lost yesterday, I thought their offense looked better than it has been recently. They were able to do some different things. And hey, maybe it will lead to different real-life results in terms of the standings. But at least if you're owning David Johnson in fantasy football, it should make you feel good about your situation moving forward after having such a tough start with him on your roster.
Yeah, definitely. And, even though that team itself is not very good, at least they have one guy that you can rely on to get the ball.
Mm-hmm. Any other running back studs that you'd like to talk about?
Running back studs?
Yeah.
I think that should do.
I got one more.
Can I guess who it is?
Go ahead.
Todd Gurley?
No.
Oh, wow.
Aaron Jones.
Okay.
32.7 points. His previous high was 15. 15 carries, 145 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also added 3 catches in the passing game for 27 yards. Man, Aaron Jones. They just traded Ty Montgomery away. He's clearly the best running back in Green Bay. Huge day for him. If you have Aaron Jones on your team and you've been patient, congrats. You finally got the breakout game.
Why would you have him before then?
He's not available. You can't get him.
I meant like a couple of weeks ago is what I was saying. If you had him and you were patient.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably had him for 4 or 5 weeks now. I mean, he's been on roster since about week 3, week 4, when he came back from suspension. He's had a couple of games over 10 fantasy points, but finally puts it all together this week. So it's a big one. Those are the kind of players that you find in waivers that can really, really help you win a fantasy football championship in season long. It can really help you win daily fantasy matchups, although his price tag will definitely be going up in daily fantasy. So
yeah, absolutely. Daily fantasy, his stock it has skyrised.
Yeah, so you want to move on to receivers?
Yes.
Let's go.
We got to talk about Corey Davis first.
Yes.
I mean, everything he does speaks for itself. I mean, over 100 yards receiving, multiple touchdowns. Like, he got the job done.
Yes, he was a player that I dropped on a couple of my teams.
Actually, 1 touchdown. I said multiple. I meant 1. Excuse me. But he has had multiple touchdowns for the season. He has 2 now.
Yes, I dropped him on one of my teams. I regret it, but
how dare you?
Hey, if they can continue to play like that, that's great. I still maintained him on one of my teams, so I didn't completely lose faith. But a big game for him. That offense looked a lot better against the Patriots. That's another game. You know that Corey Davis is kind of owning the Patriots so far in his career. He's scored 4 touchdowns against them in 2 games. That's very interesting.
Did he have a 3-touchdown game?
He had 1 yesterday, 2 last year.
So 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a big game. 2 big games against him. So, I'd like to talk about another receiver that I have lost faith in who restored some of my faith. Allen Robinson.
I think he lost a lot of people's faith.
Yes, he has been a disappointment so far, but yesterday he was not. 6 catches, 133 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's a big bounce back game. He had been hurt. Nice to see him get back into the fold with the Bears. They had a lot of different guys kind of stealing the spotlight from him lately, but yesterday was his day. Big day.
Big day. Big day. I liked him a lot too. Was there anyone else that really caught your eye when it comes to? Actually, no. There is one. I almost forgot for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know no one had a touchdown, but Godwin had a great game, but also Rodgers had a great game. Both over 100 yards receiving.
Mm-hmm.
I know fantasy points wise it was like 10 or something like that, but that's a good sign for things to come. They both caught each target they were thrown. 7 for Godwin, caught 7. 8 for Rodgers, caught 8. I would add these guys definitely to your lineups if you can.
Yeah, and 3 other players who are usual suspects on this list that had good games: Hill from Kansas City, Cooks from Los Angeles, and Michael Thomas from the Saints. All had big days yesterday too. So
that's like saying grass is green.
Yeah, let's move on to tight ends.
10, sure, you go.
Okay, so the cream of the crop yesterday was Zach Ertz, 35.5 fantasy points, 14 catches, 145 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That sounds like a wide receiver, but to get this kind of production from your tight end, big boosts in lineups. He had a huge huge day.
Yes, he did.
Who do you got?
Usually the suspect would be like Travis Kelce or someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's someone that you would not really expect. Maybe not expect. But Eric Ebron. He's been kind of struggling for the last couple of weeks, but man, he showed up yesterday.
Yeah, 3 touchdowns. He even had a rushing touchdown. That's big
isn't
time.
that weird?
Yeah, they gave him the ball in an end around. So that Colts offense, they love their tight ends, Ebron and Doyle. Doyle was obviously not the big performer yesterday, but still involved. Andrew Luck, he loves his tight ends. So if you have one of these tight ends, I'd say stay with them. Keep playing them because each week they're going to get 5-6 targets, it seems like.
Yeah.
Okay. So my last one will be Austin Hooper from Atlanta. He had 10 catches, 56 yards, and a touchdown, 16 fantasy points. He's quietly having a pretty good season as a fantasy tight end. He has 4 games now over 10 points, and we know that this position's the hardest one to play every week. If you don't have one of the studs, it's really hard to get consistent production. But when you look at the overall grand scheme of it, he's been pretty consistent. He's really only had 2 games where he put up really poor numbers. Other than that, he's pretty reliable for 5-6 fantasy points at the minimum, and then obviously he's been over 10 4 times now. So a good game for him.
Yes, absolutely a good game for him.
All right.
I don't really have any other tight ends. It was kind of like lackluster for all tight ends, all things considered. What about you?
Let's talk about defenses.
I think we need to talk about the Bills' defense.
Okay, yeah, 15 points. They're pretty good.
Yes, very good. Very good.
Redskins had 18. They led. Not a big defense week. Redskins had 18, Packers 17. Obviously it depends on your scoring, but these are the top defenses for the week. Steelers, Redskins, Packers, Bears, Chiefs, Bills. And then those had good games. So do you have anything you want to add, or should we go to a break?
I think we should go to a break.
We'll come back, talk about duds. Who was just terrible yesterday? We'll find out.
Well, we have a lot to go over. Yay.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We talked about our studs. Now let's go to our duds of the week. Who do you have as your dud for the quarterback position, my friend?
This might be very surprising.
It probably won't be.
Tom Brady.
That is surprising, actually, because he did not do well at all. Well, actually, he did have one big catch and then tripped on himself.
Yes, that's true. So, he had 11 fantasy points yesterday. He has now had 3 straight fantasy games where he has less than 18 points. He has 1 touchdown in the last 3 games, Jeff. 1 touchdown pass in the last 3 games. Tom Brady. He is no longer a reliable fantasy starter.
Yeah, that sounds right. It's reliable is something you always need to trust with somebody, and he's just not that guy.
Yeah, 1 touchdown in the last 3 games. He's had 1 touchdown or less in 5 games this year. 1 touchdown or less in 5 games this year. That is an odd thing to say when talking about maybe the greatest quarterback of all time, but he is my dud of the week. What about you for quarterbacks?
Man, it's hard to what's the word? It's hard to follow one of the greatest of all time and have him struggle. But you know what? I'm gonna go with Brock Osweiler.
Oh, really?
Yes, I mean he was thought to do well this game because the Green Bay secondary has been lackluster as of late, and 213 yards and 1 touchdown or 1 interception, not touchdown, really shows a dud to me.
Yeah.
He could have done so much more.
I didn't expect him to have a big game, but 4 points is obviously pretty terrible. So hopefully not a lot of people started him. He's only 4% owned on ESPN leagues, but some people do play him for like daily fantasy, when you can get a cheap option at quarterback. So huge dud game. Tannehill can't come back soon enough for that team, I think.
Yeah, definitely seems like the Dolphins are on a massive decline.
I got another dud.
Go for it.
How about Andy Dalton?
Yeah, I can go with that.
8 fantasy points. This is now 2 games of his last 3 where he's had under 10 fantasy points. Playing against teams that put up points against his team, so you would expect him to try and keep pace. But no. 153 yards, 1 touchdown yesterday, 2 interceptions. Andy Dalton is very unreliable. He now gets Baltimore this week. We're talking about a player that's almost 60% owned in fantasy football.
I thought you were about to say almost 60 years old. I'm like, my lord.
No. Almost 60% owned. It's time to cut bait with Dalton. He's not reliable. The matchups, even in good matchups like the Chiefs and the Saints, terrible results. Can't trust them. Go elsewhere.
True. And, can I say the biggest dud of the quarterbacks? Josh McCown.
Yeah.
135 yards on 34 passing attempts.
Mm-hmm.
So, two interceptions. That speaks for itself.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you want to move on to running back duds?
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have one?
I do. And I'm not sure if this is a dud to you, but it's a dud to me. And that's, once again, Isaiah Crowell really underachieving.
Yeah, it's just the common thing with him now. He's had, 2 good games, and the rest have been really poor?
Yeah, it just doesn't seem right.
I mean, he had 10.7, so that's actually better than what he has been doing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll tell you a big dud for me. How about James White? Mm-hmm. He has been one of the more consistent fantasy players. He came into yesterday with 25, 20, 25 in his last 3. He gets 1 carry yesterday for negative yardage. He gets 5 receptions for 30 yards, no touchdowns. He finishes with 5.1 points and a half PPR scoring. That is a far cry from his 25 points, 20 points, and 25 points that he had in his last 3. The Titans really stopped him in that short passing game. And that actually might be the reason why the Patriots weren't able to move the football very well yesterday. The Titans really stifled the Patriots. And when you look at James White's numbers, you can kind of see why.
Yeah, and another guy that's been playing really well but also just struggled yesterday was Marlon Mack.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy that's been playing incredibly well, was incredibly talented the last couple of weeks, and just really kind of was just a pedestrian yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So the guys you expect to do really well didn't do really well yesterday.
Another player, too, Sony Michel, another Patriots running back that had a bad game. 3 fantasy points. He had 31 yards rushing, no receiving yards, no touchdowns. The Patriots offense was brutal yesterday, especially for fantasy football. So, it's really hard to trust this team right now, especially because through the air, at least with Michel, he had been consistent when he was healthy. But, the Patriots offense is not actually moving as well as some of these other teams are, and it's starting to be reflective in their fantasy points. So I don't know if you're past your trade deadline or not, but it might be time to consider either moving for some of these players in a buy low option or selling some of these players and maybe getting some value back for them. But But yeah, you have another running back?
Man, Marlon Mack was like my main one. Isaiah Crowell was my other one.
I have another one.
Oh,
Jordan Howard.
well, he's been having bad games for a while.
Right, but he had been on a streak of at least 11 fantasy points 3 games in a row. He put up a dud yesterday, 3.7. He had 21 yards running, 11 yards catching, only 1 reception. Very poor output. He obviously did not score a touchdown. He had a streak of 3 games in a row, scoring at least 1 touchdown. So his struggles continue. He has not been over 16 points once this year. He's been in single digits 4 times this year. Tough year for him. Tough game yesterday.
Yeah. Again, Jordan Howard has had those really massive games where he just slips off the earth. So, yeah.
Slips off the earth. That sounds
Got it.
brutal. All right, let's go to wide receivers. You want to do that?
Sure.
Okay. A big dud for me yesterday. And, I know this might not be the biggest dud ever, but Mike Evans, 6 fantasy points. Now, I know that he had to see Josh Norman a lot, but that's now 2 games in a row where he's had really bad games. 2 fantasy points against Carolina 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, 6 fantasy points, 3 catches, 51 yards. He's getting the targets, but it's just not connecting. Him and Fitzpatrick, as well as that offense is kind of moving the ball. And yesterday we talked about it. Fitzpatrick had over 400 yards passing, but only 51 to his top receiver. So that's a dud for me, Mike Evans.
Okay. I'm not sure if you'll count this one as a dud, but I do. Larry Fitzgerald, 5 fantasy points.
Yeah.
I know he's on the worst team one of the worst offenses in the NFL, but when you're coming from a legend like that, I don't know. You just expect more.
Yeah, it's been a tough year for him. We saw David Johnson, have a good game, but not Larry Fitzgerald. Another dud for me is Golden Tate. Golden Tate had, 2.9 fantasy points. I thought, even though he's new to the Eagles, that they would incorporate him early and often. We saw Amari Cooper get incorporated early and often with the Cowboys. I thought the Eagles would do the same with Golden Tate. And he kind of is the dynamic slot receiver they've been missing. But no. In fact, Nelson Aguilar was used more than him.
I'm going to defend him.
Go ahead.
Because he just got traded to that team. That offense is new to him, and you don't want to throw the guy right into the fire as soon as he's like his first game. So give him some time.
Oh, I'm not saying that he's a bad player. I'm just saying he was a dud yesterday.
No, I'm just saying I'm defending his dud.
Yeah.
He's not going to play a lot of snaps in his first game.
I mean, we talked about it last week. I said sit him because I was uncertain. But even still, I mean, I did expect him to get more than 2 for 19. Like, that's,
another dud on the Eagles was Alshon Jeffrey.
Mm-hmm.
Like 4.8 fantasy points. And, 4 receptions, 48 yards. That's from what should be your number one receiver. That's not what you should be expecting. You should be expecting a lot more from him.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw Ertz get pretty much all of it yesterday. 150 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. Not really giving a lot for anyone else.
It was the Sunday Night Football featuring Zach Ertz.
Yeah, basically. I mean, he was the star for the Eagles last night. And obviously Wentz kept going to him. He targeted him 16 times.
And caught 14 of them.
Yeah. When one guy gets hot, it kind of hurts the rest of the team in terms of fantasy football.
Yeah.
I have another dud, though. Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd was a really popular play in daily fantasy. A.J. Green is out. The Saints.
That was why he was such popular, because
Right.
A.J. Green's gone. He's the number one now.
The Saints are known to play in high-scoring games. You'd think that the Bengals would pace them, at least throw the ball a lot. Andy Dalton had a tough day. Tyler Boyd, 3 catches, 65 yards, no touchdowns. Real rough game. 8 fantasy points, depending on your scoring. But, yeah, definitely single digits, so not a good day for him.
Do you want to move to tight ends?
Sure, let's do it.
Should we talk about Travis Kelce as a dud?
You know what? This might be the only time we can, so why not?
Yeah, sure. So for Travis Kelce on the receiving end, 6 receptions, 46 yards. That's it. 4 to 5 points fantasies depending on which league you're in.
Mm-hmm.
That's so unusual for him.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. He's consistent. He's a guy that you pencil in for like 15 points every week because he usually brings in a touchdown and about 70 receiving yards. So in fantasy football, I feel like a safe bet for him is like 14, 15 points. But for him to score under 10, he was a dud.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I got one.
What you got?
David Njoku from Cleveland. The Browns had a really good game yesterday. Their offense looked really good. Chubb had a good game, but so did Baker Mayfield. However, Mayfield didn't really go to his tight end, his young tight end, David Njoku. He only had 1 catch, 18 yards, no touchdowns. So that was easily his worst performance of the year, fantasy football-wise. Again, we talk about lack of consistency. Well, lately he had been doing pretty well. He's had 15-point game, 13-point game. But now it's another game where he's down. He's had his ups and downs. So I'm not sure what to make of him going forward.
Yeah. Another dud that he's kind of been a dud the whole season, but when a team gets 31 points and you only get 1 reception, you're a dud. Jimmy Graham.
Yes.
1 reception, 14 yards. That's all you got. And your team scored 31 points. And you're supposed to be this iconic tight end. Dud.
Yeah, I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers. Like, Aaron Rodgers doesn't really throw to his tight ends. He never really has.
Then why go to Green Bay, Jimmy?
Well, I mean, it's a chance to go play with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, right? It's like maybe you're the guy that will change.
Aaron Rodgers doesn't throw to tight ends, so why would you want to go to a guy that doesn't like tight ends? He's tight endist.
That may be true, but
he has tight endophobia.
You could go to worse places than playing with Aaron Rodgers because Jimmy Graham does make plays from time to time. I mean, he has scored a couple touchdowns this year. He's had a 100-yard game. So, I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's just you can't expect consistency from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why don't we go to
defenses?
Just disappointing. Defenses duds. I definitely will have one because it's a defense that I told everybody to go get. Jets defense. I don't know how that happened. I'm not sure how a Jets defense, it doesn't even matter that it wasn't Nathan Peterman. I can't believe they allowed Matt Barkley to light him up like that. Negative fantasy points. Terrible, terrible performance.
When you get negative fantasy points, dud.
Yes. And I definitely will wear that one because I told everybody go get that defense 2 weeks ago. And that was a mistake.
Yeah. Telling me.
Didn't see that one coming.
You're telling me.
All right. Do you have a dud?
That was my dud you took, but
I got a big dud.
Who?
Jaguars.
Yeah, but I think the Patriots are also a dud to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Jaguars were a popular number 1 pick for defenses this year in fantasy football. They were the first defense taken off the board.
Yes.
They're ranked
Eagles
24th.
were up there too, and they kind of disappointed.
The Jaguars are the 24th best fantasy football defense. They had 1 point yesterday. They've only had 3 games over 10. They haven't had one of those games since week 4.
Is Saxonville dead?
So they've had dud performances against Kansas City, Dallas, Houston, Philadelphia, and now Indianapolis. It doesn't matter if the offense is good or average. They're scoring points or putting up numbers against this defense. It doesn't look good as Jacksonville gets to play the Pittsburgh Steelers this week.
Ouch. And that should be it for our duds. We'll take a quick break. When we get back, we'll be talking about waiver wire pickups for this week and who to look out for. We'll be right on that when we return to you.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just finished our studs and duds for this week. Now we're going to our waiver wire pickups. And we're going to start with our quarterbacks. And I want to start because I don't think you're going to agree with this.
Okay, go ahead.
He is 15% owned in ESPN fantasy ownership. Marcus Mariota.
Okay. No, I agree with that.
How'd you do? Oh, fabulous.
He had a big game yesterday.
Yeah.
Tell me why people should go after him.
Well, again, he has a lot of good players around him, and he looks like he's starting to get a stride in for the season, and they looked great against New England. And you know what? You should, if you have someone on a bye week, just keep that momentum going. Hope that momentum continues for Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, that's now 2 weeks in a row where he's had multiple passing touchdowns.
Yeah, he's hot right now.
He had a rushing touchdown against the Cowboys, too. And they play the Colts this week, which their defense, they can allow some points and some yards, so might be a good matchup. I like that waiver wire ad. He's only about 15% owned right now in ESPN League, so
yeah,
readily available. Okay. I have one too.
Who?
How about Baker Mayfield? He has 3 games of his last 4 over 21 fantasy points.
I would assume he'd be picked up a lot more than usual.
Well, he's on a bye week this week, so a lot of people are going to forget about him. But what you want to do is, if you don't need to use all of your bench spots this week, like if you have a relatively healthy team or players coming back from bye, maybe you're looking to get rid of some player. He might be a player that you're looking to stash.
So you're not saying like you need him right now. You're saying like if you have room, take him.
Yeah, because we're seeing this team. We're seeing the Browns get better as the season goes on, and they get to play the Bengals when they come back from the bye week. And we saw what Drew Brees just did to that Bengals defense, and the Bengals defense is one of the worst in the NFL. So Baker Mayfield might be a nice play in Week 12. So
it's weird complimenting a Browns team, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But you know what?
All due respect,
we know that they have some talent, so it was just a matter of time, and it looks like the time might be now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. Running backs, or do you have another quarterback?
Running backs. So let's do it.
13% owned in ESPN. Rashad Penny.
Yes, and that brings up an interesting conversation. Why should people go after him?
Well, he had 108 rushing yards and 1 touchdown against a relatively decent defense of the Rams. And you know what? I think they're going to trust him more with the running. I think they're going to say, okay, this guy had a good game. Let's see how he goes. And the momentum's going to keep picking up for Penny. He was the first-round pick in this year's draft. And why not trust him?
Okay. And
I think he could be a good flex player.
I'll tell you why. Because Chris Carson didn't play yesterday. He's their starter. He's had some really good games this year. Mike Davis has also had some good games this year. So now you kind of have Rashad Penny as the third wheel in a 3 running back set that they use all 3 running backs. If Carson is healthy, which, he was a game time decision yesterday, so he should be back this week, is Penny somebody that you still consider picking up?
Yes, because I think they still are evening out the rushing carries and option passes pretty well against those 3. And I think Mike Davis is going to get less snaps, and Rashad Penny is going to get more snaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had 12 carries. Penny had 12 carries yesterday, so I mean, he got the work, but
he can only improve, in my opinion.
Yeah, I
wouldn't say it's a gamble either. I would say more of the lines of like.
But are you worried that he could actually go this week without getting more than 3 or 4 carries? Because it's possible, right? Like if Carson and Davis are healthy, there's a scenario where maybe he gets 3 or 4 carries for 15 yards, right?
It is true, but I don't know. I have a gut feeling about this. I know everyone's like, oh, I got a gut feeling. Everyone has a gut feeling. But Rashad Penny is something special. He was something special at San Diego State. He's showing a bit of that flash with Seattle against the Rams. And you know what? Why not just take a shot with him? I think he could be a really good flex player for you.
Yeah, okay. So I have a running back who is less than 1% owned. That might be somebody who you want to keep your eye on. That's Jalen Samuels.
Ooh, I thought you were going to say Jacquizz Rodgers, but okay.
Jalen Samuels. Do you know who Jalen Samuels is?
I believe he plays for, I don't know.
He is a Steelers running back.
Oh, so he's a backup to Connor.
Yes. If Le'Veon Bell does in fact sit the rest of the season, Jalen Samuels is now the backup running back for the rest of the season in Pittsburgh. and James Conner's coming off a concussion. So, what does this mean, Jeff? I'll tell you.
Oh, I see what you're getting
Yes.
at. Clever.
Is Jalen Samuels a very good player? That I don't know, but I would probably say probably not. However, if you have the running back in the Pittsburgh offense, you'd be a happy man, whether it's you, me, or Jalen Samuels. So, hey, go out and pick him up. If Le'Veon Bell does, in fact, not report now, we will know tomorrow. This might be a player that you can just not pick up and just wait around, and when you get word that it's official that Le'Veon Bell is not coming back, it might be a guy that you take a flyer on. It just might be. It might be somebody who's irrelevant in a week or two, or it might be somebody who you plug and play this week if Connor can't go.
Okay. You want to go to running? You want to stick with running back? Or you want to go to receiver?
Whatever you'd like.
All right, we'll go to wide receiver then. One guy that impressed me a lot yesterday that can continue, Anthony Miller, Chicago Bears wide receiver, 13.3% owned in ESPN fantasy ownership.
Yeah, absolutely.
And 5 receptions, 122 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, 23 fantasy points. The rookie receiver, I mean, he had a slow start to the season, granted, but he's developed into a serious contributor.
Big time. He had, 6 targets yesterday? And that was a big game.
Caught 5 of them, so can only think of good things, and I think Trubinsky's throwing into him more and more, and I think he's going to be a go-to receiver.
Yes. All right, I have one. How about a player that we've talked about before, Josh Reynolds, wide receiver, Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp is officially out for the rest of the season. He has a torn ACL. He will not be back. Josh Reynolds now assumes the position as a number 3 receiver. Again, this is a receiving core and a team that has 3 wide receiver sets on 90% of the plays that they run. So that guarantees that Josh Reynolds will be on the field a ton. That guarantees that he'll be in a great offense. That guarantees that he'll be catching passes from Goff. And opposing defenses are more likely to cover Cooks and Robert Woods a little bit more tightly now with Cooper out, with Cooper Kupp out. Is Josh Reynolds going to be a good player for this team?
I don't know.
He had one game where he had 3 catches and 2 touchdowns just a couple weeks ago against the Packers when Cooper Kupp was out. He's an interesting player. This is a situation, Jeff, where the actual situation on his team is better than his talent, but he assumes that role, and it could work out.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And the fact of the matter is, there's so much potential there. No? Am I wrong on that?
No, I mean, absolutely. The situation, he falls into a perfect situation. Do you have another wide receiver?
I'm going to kind of this is a big if, because he's 68% owned in ESPN. Corey Davis?
Yeah, he's too high.
Yeah. I thought about that, but he's 68%. That's kind of low, all things considered for him. But that's going to rise, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So, how about Maurice Harris?
Maurice Harris, okay.
Wide receiver, Redskins. He had 10 catches last week, 19 fantasy points. Yesterday against the Bucks, he doesn't score, but he gets 8 fantasy points. So, hey, maybe he is a reliable player. We'll see. He plays Houston this week. But with the injuries to the receiving core of Washington, he's getting a lot of opportunity there. And he might be a player that you can just plug and play.
Yes. And I have one more wide receiver.
Go ahead.
Brandon Marshall. 4% owned in ESPN. It's got to be with the New Orleans Saints. And Breeze is such a good quarterback, he's going to make him look like a Pro Bowler.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all I got to say about that.
I got one last one.
Mm-hmm.
It's somebody who I don't feel comfortable saying because the offense and the quarterback have been super inconsistent. But John Ross, wide receiver, Bengals, he's a first-round talent. He's got super speed.
He was a questionable first-round talent, though.
Yeah, he is with Andy Dalton, but if A.J. Green is out for a couple more weeks, this guy immediately becomes an option as a flex play because he does have that lightning speed. He scored a touchdown yesterday. Somebody's got to catch the ball. Tyler Boyd, excuse me. Tyler Boyd is a good player, but there has to be someone else, and it could be John Ross. But other than that, do you want to move to tight end?
Yeah, sure. I got one. Just one. Jonnu Smith.
Okay.
Tennessee. He had 3 receptions, 45 yards, and a touchdown. 0.6% owned in ESPN. And I just think maybe you should get him while he's hot.
Yes.
Like, I know he's not the most used tight end in the league, but man, he contributed big time for Tennessee, and I think that's going to continue.
Yes, I have one. Jeff Heuerman, Denver Broncos. Now, they were on a bye week, so people forgot.
I forgot about Denver.
He had 10 catches, 83 yards, and a touchdown in his first game playing without Demaryius Thomas in that offense. So he scored a touchdown.
So it's only going to get better from here?
You would think so. He scored a touchdown in 2 straight games. People forgot about him. Jeff, he is 4% owned, or 7% owned, 7% owned in ESPN leagues, which means he's very much available for the most part. And, with all the inconsistency at tight end, he might be worth putting on your roster, seeing if he can keep up the opportunity. Because if he's getting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 targets a week, that's really good. That's something that you look for. So he could be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to talk about defenses?
Well, I have one more tight end, and then we can talk about defenses.
Go for it.
Ricky Seals-Jones, Arizona Cardinals. They make a change at offensive coordinator. Yesterday, 5 catches, 51 yards. They play the Raiders this week, who are very good at letting opposing pass catchers do damage. Ricky Seals-Jones is interesting for the Cardinals because Larry Fitzgerald, he's a focal point, but Ricky Seals-Jones is another body, another big receiver that can make some plays at the tight end position. So, yes, we can move on to defenses now.
Okay, who do you have for defense?
That's a good question. I thought you had one ready to go.
I thought, no, but I actually do have one. They've been playing pretty well, but they've given up a lot of points. But the Arizona Cardinals, 15.5% ESPN fantasy owned. And I say them because they do get a lot of sacks, and they are playing the Raiders on Sunday.
Yes, that's a good streamer right there. Arizona Cardinals, I agree with that. So, let's see. This might sound a little odd, but how about the Saints defense? They're only 16% owned. They're a little bit unreliable. But they do play Philadelphia this week. Philadelphia's been struggling. I don't know if it's the best play, but it is a defense that is available for the most part. You can get them in most leagues. So, do you have another defense that you would recommend?
No, that was my main one.
Okay. Yeah, and defenses are all about the matchup, right? They're all about, for me, I'm somebody who loves to stream defenses. That's just something that I always look at the matchup rather than maybe the talent on that side of the ball. Look for the opportunity, which quarterbacks are struggling, which offenses are struggling, and try and find those defenses. So that's kind of my strategy, as is with others too. Cool. So why don't we take a quick break, and then, Jeff, we come back. We need to recap our weekly bet. We're going to see who's doing 30 push-ups. We'll see.
I have a feeling
we'll recap it. We'll do it, and we'll do it right after this.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We just finished our studs and duds and our waiver wires for this week. Now we go on to the little competition that me and Mark have in our little fantasy football league. Who won? Just straight up say who won.
No, we have to go through.
God, just get it over with. It's like a gunshot. Just do it.
For 30 push-ups. We got to go over the teams again so the listeners don't have to remember. All right, so you chose Mahomes. I chose Rivers. You chose Melvin Gordon. I chose Todd Gurley. You chose Tyler Boyd. I had Michael Thomas. You had Kelsey. I had Ertz.
I had the duds. I got it.
You had Kamara. And I had Hunt. No, that's not necessarily true. Mahomes got you 23.9. Rivers got me 18.9, so you had the advantage by 5 there. Running backs, you had Gordon with 27. I had Gurley with 25.5. You had the advantage by 1.5 there. Wide receiver, it changed course, though. You had Boyd, who had 8. I had Thomas, who had 23. And then at tight end, you had Kelsey at 7.6. I had Ertz at 35.5. You had Kamara at 24.2 in the flex. I had Kareem Hunt, who didn't have a good game. Basically, the Chiefs' offense didn't have a great game. He had 10.6. So, my team finishes with a total of 113.5. Your team finishes with a total of 90.7. Jeff, that is 2 weeks in a row. You have to do push-ups, 30 push-ups. Let's see it.
Let me just do my stretches.
Stretch out. Don't hurt yourself. Stretching is important. And then maybe you'll go to Bikram yoga this week, you know.
Well, if Le'Veon plays, then I will.
We'll see. All right, 30. All right, he's doing them. He's going. He's really going for it. I feel like he might get to 30. If you want, Jeff, you could take a break.
I got this.
He says he's got it. You're so close. Don't quit now. He's got it. Oh, he's done it.
I had to do them quick.
Now he's sweating. He's wearing a sweatshirt. He's probably going to have to take that off.
Ladies, hold up. I won't do that just for you.
Yeah. Catch your breath. Catch your breath. So, we do this every week, and if you've been following, it's been back and forth. Jeff actually took a loss 2 weeks ago because Rob Gronkowski didn't play, so he had an unfortunate result there.
Garbage that was.
And then Kelsey has a dud, so tight end might be your kryptonite. It might be. If
I go crazy, then will you stop?
Oh, God. Nobody wants to hear that song. But, yeah, we'll see what we do this week. I have a feeling you won't be selecting some of these players. I have a feeling even when you can select Tyler Boyd again, you won't for a while. You're probably really jaded on that. You took a chance on him. Not a bad idea.
And he let me down.
Gordon and Kamara did their thing for you, but Mahomes, only 23 fantasy points. You expect 30 from him. You expect Kelsey with at least 15. And if you would have had that, maybe it would have been different. Ertz was my stud, obviously. I mean, what a baller. 35.5 fantasy points yesterday. That's insane. So, any news and notes that you want to talk about in terms of fantasy football? We have obviously injury news, as we talked about earlier.
Cooper Kupp. Gotta get my breath in.
Cooper Kupp torn ACL. Josh Reynolds might be the next guy up for the Rams, but that should at least boost Cooks, Woods, and Gurley for the owners of those players. It will be interesting to see how Sean McVay and that offense changes. Will they use less 3 receiver sets? Maybe they will. Maybe, we saw yesterday their tight end got a touchdown. Maybe they'll use tight ends a little bit more. Who knows? It is something to monitor, though. Brandon Marshall, you're big on him?
I think he can have a good game, possibly.
Yeah.
He has a lot of time to learn the playbook.
I'm not so big on him, but you wouldn't start him this week, right? I mean,
it depends on who they're playing. Let me check who they're playing.
Well, I mean, you we saw Golden Tate not really get.
Yeah, but that was less than a week.
Well, Marshall's less than a week, right?
Marshall's is about a week.
I mean, when did Golden Tate get traded?
I thought he got traded like the Tuesday.
He got traded like 2 weeks ago, I believe. He
Was
got
it 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, they had a bye week. He had all that time to prepare.
Oh, never mind then. What am I thinking? Oh, man.
Yeah, but I mean, you know,
They
it's
are
always,
playing the Eagles.
It's always risky with new players, you know, like at receiver.
He can go in for a couple of snaps, get like a short
Yeah, but
red
you
zone
don't-
touchdown. I wouldn't start him, no,
yeah, I
not
was
this
gonna
week.
say that's incredibly risky if you're relying on a red zone touchdown.
Unless you have like a bye week somebody and you have no one else, then go for it. But
Yeah.
I will say that he will be worth the ticket price once it gets the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, possibly. All right. Well, I think we're all set for today. Join us on Friday
Yes.
as we do our. We do every Monday and Friday, of course. We pick our teams on Friday. That's where me and Jeff kind of lay it out there. We tell you who you should start, who you should sit, based on the matchups, based on the opportunity. You have to subscribe if you haven't already. The GSMC Podcast Network, actually, we do other sports too. We do football. We actually have a sports podcast, but we do football and
Sports is every day, and then
Yep.
it varies on what we do the rest of the week.
football, basketball, baseball.
Football will
Please
be
check
this
it
whole
out.
entire week, though.
Yep.
Football will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week. So hopefully you get enough football.
Yes. So we'll see you Friday.
Yes, we will see you on Friday for the Fantasy Football Podcast, but make sure you tune into the other podcasts that we do, all sports related. We will see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.